Hey, thanks for joining us. Today, we are going to talk about propensity modeling, which is something that seems so abstract and so distant. And we're going to try to put that into concrete terms to talk about how does it affect and how does it make marketing better and more efficient. So my guest today is Schaun Wheeler, PhD anthropologist and data scientist at AMP. So thank you for joining us, Schaun.
Happy to be here.
So there's a new topic, and it's really, if you look out there at like the links, and I've been Googling and kind of researching, and it's still in this like abstract state, and it's not really tangible, and it's around propensity modeling. So could you give us kind of a down to earth definition of like what is propensity modeling?
Sure. So, I mean, at its core, propensity is just a prediction, but there's different kinds of predictions. I mean, of course, you got like the sort of everyday, like talking to someone casually sense of a prediction of like, oh, is it going to rain tonight? And you're like, that obviously is, we're talking more sophisticated than that. But when you get into more sophisticated predictions, there's actually like two kinds. There's one that you could call more of a forecast, which is what you usually see when like you look at the news and they're tracking like different lines over time, and they're like, see how these two lines went up together? Like it's showing like, here's what we think the economy is going to be like next quarter, stuff like that. And those are all work at an aggregate level. So it's here is how the state's economy is doing, or this is how like number of car crashes or whatever. And those can be helpful for you to understand general trends, but knowing that the I don't know, the rate of home buying is going up, and having that forecast that it's going to continue going up does not help you look at an individual person and say, well, are they going to buy a home? And that is what a propensity is it pulls it from this aggregate level into the individual level, where instead of saying, oh, our number of shoe sales are going up, it's let's look at this individual person. Here is their propensity to buy shoes. That can be shown in lots of different ways. Usually the way most of these models work is it'll end up being a percentage of probability. So anywhere from they have a 0% chance to 100% chance of doing it. But that's essentially what a propensity is it's an individualized forecast represented as the chance that they're going to do it.
Okay. And what kind of things would we be able to predict at an individual user level with a propensity model from a marketing perspective?
So there's a few different ways to look at that. One, if you look at, if we're talking about app users, anything they can do on the app, you can model their propensity to do it. So yes, the obvious ones are like visits, purchases, clicks, things like that. But you could also look at much more granular events, such as are they going to enable GPS if that's relevant for your app? Are they going to update their profile or share something? Like all those things, you can look at their propensity to use certain types of functionality in your app. That's sort of a more of a propensity-based behavioral segmentation. Which is useful as all different kinds of uses, not only in understanding what they're likely to do, but also being able to decide to focus in a targeted way on people who are likely to do certain things or unlikely to do it if you're trying to cross-sell, stuff like that. Another way to do it is you take the parts of your app that really matter to you, your funnel. So your conversion event, whatever that is, but also perhaps some of the stuff before it, some intent signals and things like that. And you can use that then to create a propensity score for the users to react to particular things. So you use it to, this is a lot of what we do at AMP is training an AI to recognize that, well, when you present them with information that emphasizes the convenience of your product, then they have a higher propensity to enter your funnel. Whereas if you just focus on the cost savings, hey, we can give you a good deal, they have a lower propensity. Other users might be the exact opposite. So you can actually back into propensities that are connected to specific offerings, to particular value propositions, by connecting it to your funnel, even at the same time that you just do the general propensities to be able to understand what people are likely to do on your app in
Mm-hmm.
general.
Mm-hmm. I think if I took a step back, because I think there's a lot of information there. If I'm thinking from like a product design perspective, am I right in saying that knowing people's propensity to do certain actions? So I don't know if I'm looking at this right, because we said propensity is an individual, but if I look at the aggregate again, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Could I influence my product design? So if I know that, for example, most people aren't likely, I'll say likely for propensity, most people aren't likely to use a certain feature, then maybe I don't explore that feature. Otherwise, if people are likely to use a certain feature, then maybe I spend more time on building out that certain feature. Would that be something that's useful?
This is where product design can get really interesting, because on one hand, yes, you could say, they don't have much of a propensity to do this particular thing, therefore it's not that important. But two things. One, are there certain people who have a propensity to use that relatively unused thing that don't have a propensity to do anything else? Like, is that the way you're keeping them live in the app? Because if that is the case, you actually want to maybe even build that out. You can then make your app more sticky for a subset of your population that would not stick otherwise. But the other thing is, let's say that's not the case. So you don't have anyone who has to have that thing to stick around. You also want to look at, of the people who have a propensity to do a certain thing, what is their propensity to do the next thing that you want to do? So it could be that relatively few people go through, and actually we saw this recently in one of our customers. That GPS example I picked out was not pulled completely out of the blue. We had a customer do that, and actually it showed that when we looked at the propensity chain, they don't have a whole lot of users who do the GPS thing, but those who did enable GPS were much more likely to be retained. So it's you have to look at not only their propensity to do the thing, but what implications that has for the things you care about, which are usually engagement, conversions, and retention. So you don't want to ever look at a propensity all by itself. You want to say, what are the consequences of those people who do that, and then what's the likelihood, the propensity for them to do that? And it's those two connections that matter.
I think I actually saw the data on that one. So for example, workout fitness app, if you turn on your GPS, there was one that was like a connection to an Apple Watch. So if you connect with your Apple Watch, which is a lower overall percentage of the population, not everybody has an Apple Watch, but if you connect it with your Apple Watch, it shows that you are using this app as part of your life cycle. You've integrated it into your life because you're starting to connect it with these other devices that you have. And so if you connect it with these other devices, that's a sign that you are going to be a more high value user and stick around more, because I'm not going to go through the effort to connect you to all of my random things around the house, smart scale, Apple Watch, whatever, if it's not worth that much to me. And similarly, I'm more likely to be retained because now, like, for example, I could get a notification on my watch that says, hey, don't forget your workout today, as opposed to just my phone. So like the whole ecosystem becomes stickier.
I mean, there's so many things that can go on there. It could be that it's showing that you have just a higher overall intent going in. You're like, okay, I'm going to be serious about this connected to my stuff. It could be that you are structuring your environment, your information environment, and in the case of an Apple Watch, your physical environment, to remind you to do the thing. And so you're more likely to do it, even if you have lower intent, just because you've built that in. There's a lot of different. That's one of the powerful things about propensity modeling is it can suggest the why, but it actually, you don't need it. There are some cases where you need to know why someone's doing something in order to know what to do about it. But in these other cases, you can, like, just knowing that, okay, smartphone connection is important, even though it's not common. You can then start imagining all the different whys, and you can actually start doing things like messaging or changing your product to emphasize these different things and start discovering them. So a propensity can often be the starting point to answering those why questions. You can't answer why in general. Why always has to be a specific thing. It gives you that specific starting point.
I feel like this is your anthropology background. I feel like as humans, we feel like we need to make the why, though. Like we need to make a reason why. But yeah, to your point, if the smartphone connection is important, maybe that becomes like a prompt when you first join the app. Like when you first start, like, hey, connect your watch. Because if it's a feature that's available but not otherwise seen by many people, then they may miss it and not do it, and then that could hurt. So this could help drive your other. There was another one. Do you mind going into, because I saw you did another one referencing gift cards in e-commerce. Could you elaborate a little on that?
Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that one. I'm glad you reminded me.
That was so good.
And it's been a little while, so tell me if I get this one wrong. But what I remember of it is we were looking at these propensities to retain, and the other nice thing about propensities is that they're always a two-sided scale. So if you're looking at the propensity for retention, all you have to do is look at the other side, and you now have a propensity to churn. And so you can then you can emphasize whichever one is more important to you at the moment. But what we found is when we found a lot of cases where gift card usage was actually predictive of churn. But it was specifically predictive of churn for brand new users, like first day on the app using a gift card. Were very likely to churn, whereas someone who'd been on the app for a while already used a gift card. It was in the middle. It wasn't a retention device, wasn't a churn device. It was just there. Which suggests, like you said, or I was looking for a why, it suggests that what the users were doing is they had been incentivized to join the app in the first place. They're like, we will pay you if you come use our app because we're giving you this gift card. It's free money. You should go use it. And it suggests that users who did that, they came on, they used the free stuff you gave them, and then they left because that was the only reason they came on. And so, I mean, there's so many implications there. Like, one, is that gift card incentivizing actually worth it, or actually are you losing money because you're not retaining your users? That the propensity suggests that you ought to do the analysis to look through a little further and make sure that enough of those users are staying to justify the cost of the incentives. But at the same time, if you bring those users in with the gift card, you have to make sure that you have a mechanism in place to give them a reason to come back. You can't assume that they're going to follow the same workflows as the users who came organically, who had a reason to begin with. And so it may mean building out a better messaging strategy for new users or different aspects of your product that will, once they use that gift card, you need to very quickly get on there because they might not stick around for very long, to give them additional reasons to engage. And a user who comes on without a gift card probably doesn't need that as much. So it's actually an opportunity for some differentiated experience.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I saw two people looking at the same data, right? I saw that, and I was thinking of when I receive a gift card. I wasn't thinking of the app giving out gift cards for people to join, although that happens. And I've heard from several apps that the worst customers are the ones that you incentivize to download, because they didn't have the intrinsic care within themselves to download. So then I was thinking of it like, I get a gift card from my parents. Like, it's funny, I think, generationally, when you look at gift cards and how they're given, right? Because I think some of it's coming back, or maybe it's just my age. But I'm quick to cut people like a gift card, like an Amazon gift card online or whatever. But I think about my parents when they give me a gift card to a place. I'm like, it's like, it might be to like Best Buy, and like, nothing wrong with Best Buy. I just don't use Best Buy a lot. So it's like, it's kind of like this one-off trip of like, well, usually it sits in a drawer forever and then I go take it.
Yeah,
if it's a physical one, as an example. Yeah, but then it's like, I'm never going to go. It's outside of my normal pattern of what I purchase. So therefore, just to tie this up, because I think it is interesting. In the same study, I think we saw that loyalty programs, I don't think this is surprising, but like loyalty programs were a higher indication that someone is likely to be retained or stay. So maybe it's part of the gift card as a sign up for a loyalty program. And really, if that turns people off to the point where they don't do the gift card, you're probably still not at a loss, because like we just showed, people make a purchase and then leave. So like, that helps drive some business
Yeah.
decision. We did see an interesting one that I might be totally misreading, but I thought this was really interesting for like a whole wide audience. When people logged in with a Google or Facebook ID, we saw for one app that we looked at, it was actually a pretty decent indicator of churn. It wasn't like the bottom 20 events listed. So like maybe, but I just wonder about if I were to put in more effort to make an account, I am more likely to stay. So I think there's a balance, and maybe that's me putting in the why, and it could be totally wrong, but I think there's a balance between convenience and making it easy for people to log on and leaving. And I think this propensity analysis might show you, is it worth the effort? Because you might say, look, I have so much more signups, but their propensity to churn within a day is so much higher that, like, is that actually worth it? It's a decision you have to make from your data infrastructure and costs and all that stuff analysis.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I love propensities. This is because they raise these questions that normally, like from a design perspective, like designing a UI, you're like, okay, it's all about reducing friction. We want to just make it as easy for them to log in as possible. And it's not until you see that, oh wait, the easier it is to log in, the easier it is to log off.
Yeah.
And that's something that I mean, because I help our team design parts of our UI, and that's never been something that came into my mind until I saw that data and went, wait a minute, there's a chance that reducing friction is reducing friction all the way through and right out the back door, rather than just reducing it in the front.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. All right. So we're taking out the single sign-on. Single sign-on is gone. No, I'm just kidding. So this all it seems like a lot. It seems really intimidating. And I've Googled a lot about this, and it seems like, there's algorithms that need to be run in full data science teams and all this. It seems like a lot. So it seems like one of those things that's not really accessible right now. Like, would be nice to have, can't have. Can you give me an idea of how? So not like a plug and play way, but like how would, like, logically, how is propensity score calculation done? And then we'll get into like how can someone actually use it, but like how is it even done?
So I think this actually gets to your question of why it's not used more often. It has to do something with the available tool set out there. But the actual modeling, I mean, what you need is some data set that represents activities over time. So an app event stream works fine. But you then have to structure that. And that's where you often, where teams will often have to pull in a data science team to work on this, because it's not always, it's not just a point and click. Oh yeah, this is what I want. Now throw all the data into the meat grinder and it gives me what I want. You have to aggregate things a certain way. You have to decide what your target is going to be. You then put that into a model. All the model is doing is identifying correlations between what you're called the features. So that's all of the different stuff someone could do on the app. And then the target, or the outcome, or whatever you want to call it, the independent variable, if you're statistically inclined, that is the thing that you really care about, that you're wanting to find the propensity for. So if they do one of these features, what's the probability that they will do the target thing? The how the model does that depends on which model you choose. I don't know that we need to get into that. That's I mean, if you really wanted to, I can talk about that stuff all day, but it's I don't know that would be particularly interesting. But all it's really looking for is, well, when this thing tends to happen, that they tend to do the thing more often. If this thing tends to happen, they do the thing less often. And the model's balancing all of those. So it's looking at, well, this person did 5 things. How do I strain out that this was the one that raised it and the other 4 actually depressed it? So there's lots of different mathy ways of doing that. But in the end, the model outputs usually a probability. You can get models that will output a different kind of value if that's important to you. For instance, you can do revenue propensities that aren't like propensity to generate revenue, but actually will predict like higher revenue versus lower revenue, stuff like that. Those are all feasible, like that exists within the modeling world. But then you get to this point where you're like, okay, like this is where it breaks down, because yeah, you can hire a data science team, or even like you get a freelancer to do it. Like that modeling stuff is not particularly complicated. In fact, even a lot of organizations out there, like Google and Azure both do it. This automatic machine learning stuff, AutoML is a thing, where you can throw your data set in and it will try to create predictions for you. It's not as straightforward as the marketing materials make it look, but those things do exist. There are companies that do that. But that's not where it breaks down. Like that. Okay, so you get it. You have your propensity. You're like, okay, so I know if a person does this, they have a 50% chance, and if they do this, they have a 70% chance. Now what? And that is where it breaks down, because that's what I meant earlier by saying this problem with the tool set is products have particular avenues that they can take to influence the way their product works. Messaging is one that, of course, we think about a lot at AMP, because it's a way of extending your product into the view of the user on demand. But there are other ways too. I mean, if you can look at UI changes, like that you can do stuff with your product. And most tool sets for doing stuff with your product do not have a way of plugging in model outputs. So it becomes this manual committee kind of process of, okay, well, the model just told us all of this stuff. What do we do with it now? It's actually the exact same. It is the exact same problem as A/B testing. When companies do A/B tests, they're like, okay, A performed 3 times better than B. Great. We like A. What do we do with that? And you start getting into these why questions, like especially if it's like a messaging test, you're like, A performed better than B, but that was message A. We can't send message A 50 more times because it performed better this once, and people will notice. And so you have to start thinking about, well, why was message A better? What was it about that? How can we craft a message that has those same attributes but doesn't look redundant? Like all of that is really, really hard to do. And messaging tool sets do not have a way to do that unless you have AMP. There's my shameless plug. But we can, by instrumenting the messaging, to be able to take the outputs of these models and feed them right back in and pull new content or new decisions for your product and keep that cycle going. Unless you have that, it becomes very, very difficult to use propensities. Once you have that, using the propensities is effortless. It just happens in the background. It's like you don't have to think about your car engine running. It just keeps running. And that's what propensities should look like, but it requires not just the skills and the effort to create the propensity models and achieve those scores, but also the pipelining. You have to have that plumbing of moving those scores into a decision, evaluating the decision, having that go back and affect the propensities, and you keep going that way. That's the tool set that largely doesn't exist, except in cases where, like AMP, we're building it, because it's most tool sets for products are stuck in sort of a software 1.0 kind of mindset of, here's these different rules you're going to set up. It's like it's this static kind of, in this situation do this, in this situation do this, and you have to manage these huge rules. That was the pre-data science way of engineering a product. That was the way when you had engineers who were like, okay, we'll give them a drop down and they select which one they want. There's still use for those kinds of things, but increasingly, the more those drop downs, you can move into essentially having the model select the drop down for you on a case by case basis. That's software 2.0, where you're no longer going through and setting all of these static rules. You're giving the information to the model, and the model is saying, I'm going to hedge your bets for you. It's the way algorithmic trading works. You're like, okay, I think this is the better bet. Therefore, we're going to go with that this time. So it selects the drop down for you. And it keeps going through that. That's the kind of tool set that is the future, and increasingly the present.
There's so much. Let me summarize. Let me see if I summarize and I get it right. I'm going to start at the beginning. So you mentioned to build a model like this, I need to give it a whole bunch of data on things that were done previously. So like an app event stream is a great source. So an event stream, anytime anyone does something on an app, it records, the user ID, the timestamp, the action done. So usually though, it's just a big pile of user IDs, timestamps, and actions, right? So what the propensity model does is attempt to connect those in reference to a chosen output or multiple chosen outputs and see how do those connections of events, so like not just user A did X at Y time, user B did X at Y time, how do I connect, like look for patterns in usage behavior that tend to or tend to not lead to certain things.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there was one. So in the Googling I've done, this is where I think it was cool. The Googling I've done, a lot of people talk about discovering certain quadrants, like here's a high value, low touch user, which is amazing, right? A high value, low touch user means they just keep producing and I don't have to do anything. A low value, high touch user, on the other hand, is bad. So a propensity model depends on a different one and what it outputs and whatever. It can give you like level of effort required and like estimate of level of effort required, an estimate of output. So obviously if someone is high touch but low output, they're not worth my time. So it seems like there's a great efficiency savings in using a propensity model because I can figure out like this is a very high maintenance user. I wish I had this back when I was a freelancer because you could find out like this customer is a giant pain in the butt and they're not going to pay me. I shouldn't spend any time there. Is that like a simplistic output of like?
Yes, that can work. What I think is important to point out is that it is a great efficiency builder when you are talking about human effort. Like if you're going to have to make all those decisions, then you can't make a decision about every single user. You've got to limit your attention because you got a human brain that can't focus on everything at once. So let's pick those high value, low touch users. Great, work with that. But the thing is, as soon as you can feed it into a system that can make those decisions on your behalf, you set priorities, and you can trust the system to pursue those priorities. A high touch user is no longer high touch, or rather they're still high touch, but you're not the one doing it. Like we've seen this with several of our apps where we've started taking individual user journeys and plotting out where we messaged, where they acted, things like that. And you can see like cases where a user came on the app, poked around a little bit, didn't really do anything. We message them, they don't do anything. Message them again, they don't do anything. We start the AI starts slowing down the messaging over time. It's like, okay, we don't want to annoy them. But then we check with them again. They're like, oh, okay, I'll check it out now. So we're like, okay, we just got a bite or a nibble at least. So then we start throwing out a few more messages and pretty soon they convert. But in other cases, we have incredibly high touch users where like we're messaging them multiple times a day and they are responding multiple times a day. Doing that as an individual human, like trying to make that decision would be just way too much effort. You'd be like, okay, I mean, I know I can get them to respond, but I got to do so much to get them to do it. But the computer's not sitting there going, oh man, I got to send another message. That's easy to do when you have a system to do it. And so, yeah, I do think those kinds of quadrants, they're useful. I think they drastically undersell the power of propensities because they assume that you are limited by your own attention and effort as an individual person. Whereas if you have a tool set that can augment that, like that, you no longer had that limitation. There's no reason to drop out those other quadrants. Those are still people who can provide value to your app, and who you can provide value to. And you should be able to. It just means they have different needs than other people. Because I mean, it goes back to that idea of the greasing the skids too much, to where you reduce all the friction. Like if you build your app around users who don't require much, what's the second and third order effect of that? Of users who like, it wasn't really that hard to get me in. Maybe it's not that hard to get them out. Like that can be a short-sighted way of building. What you really want to do is build for everyone, which is like scary and seems impossible from an individual human standpoint. But as soon as you involve an AI, which, I mean, that's one of the reasons to do propensity modeling, is that you were incorporating this machine learning into your decision making. You are able to address different needs individually at scale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have a macro lens, like we talked about, of I can show which events or which actions tend to keep users engaged, which can affect your like things, product design or ads or whatever, or things that are more of a one to many. So for example, like even if we grease the skids and we find out people come in, we find out the loyalty program is what makes them stay from our propensity modeling, then we really focus on emphasizing our loyalty program. But at the individual user level, since we have individual propensities, we might find out that for this particular user, they're not interested in the loyalty program. What I use as an example is like there are certain, like my wife will find clothes for her mom. It's just one of their funny little relationships. And so she has some apps where she looks for clothing for her mom that she would never buy clothes for herself. But her biggest function is like the share function, because she just wants to share them with her mom. Hey, look at this. You should get this. So if we use traditional, if she's active and she's encouraging purchases, but not directly. So like we would never pick up on that as like a purchase, but we know for her that share function is really important. Whereas for other people, the share function means nothing to them, right? So it's like, what do we emphasize to each individual user, right? Depends on what data we have. If I were to pull it, we talked a little bit about this, but if I were to pull it into something really practical like retention, we talked about percentages, like how would knowing somebody's propensity to churn benefit me in general as a marketer?
So, I mean, you have the immediate decision-making help of, for example, if you have incentives available and you don't want to send them out to everyone, because if everyone takes the incentive, every incentive that someone takes who doesn't need it is money lost from your perspective as a marketer. So what you'd want is to find people who have a better than even chance of churning. So if someone has a 2% chance of churning, you don't need to pay them to stay. They're going to stay anyway. But at the same time, if someone has a 98% chance of churning, there's like they're already out the door, more or less. Like it may not be worth it to try to get them to stay a few more days, and then they leave after that. So what it allows you to make some decisions, which like say 50 to 80% chance of churning, let's offer them this. So it allows you to conserve your resources and focus on the people who most need it. Also, I mean, if you're going to reach out to them, reaching out in and of itself can actually contribute to churn. If people feel like they're getting bothered by how many messages. And so this allows you to not bother people who don't need to be bothered. And this can be, it's funny, like this is something that's intuitive when it comes to like add to carts, like a cart abandonment. You wouldn't send a cart abandonment message to someone who hadn't abandoned their cart. You'd be like, that would be silly. That would be annoying and confusing. Why would you do that? And yet often you will send campaigns to keep people from churning to people who didn't do anything to suggest they were going to churn. And it's almost as confusing and annoying for those individuals to receive that. The benefits of a propensity model is that you can get triggers for those kinds of swishier things, like an abandoned cart. You know that they added something to cart, they haven't checked out with it yet. Okay, like that's there. But for churn, like you don't like look at it. There's no like start churning event on the app that triggers when they do something, like, but you can create that. You can basically create the they've started churning event and then trigger things based on that.
I've seen one example is most apps have like a hard window for what they consider an active user or and sometimes I feel like it's even it doesn't line up with even my perception of what I would be active. So like some of the shortest windows I've seen are gaming, and it's like gaming, if you're gone for 7 days, you're dead to me. You know, like if you're out for 7 days, you're never coming back. That's my perception. You're just gone forever. So I set my churn window at 7 days. For me, it's funny because like I think of like it's just because I'm in that stage of life, taking kids to like soccer games. So if you take your kid to a soccer game, you might sit in the bleachers and you're just stuck there. I'm stuck there for like 2 hours. So what am I going to do? So playing a game might make sense. But otherwise, my life is busy. So I'm not going to be playing a game. So it's like I am that 7 day 1 to day 7 or day 0, day 6, however you want to look at it. I am that person because I'm only playing once per week, and it's only when I'm taking my kid to soccer practice. So then 1 week you don't have practice because it's, you know, Memorial Day or whatever. Just pick a holiday or you go on vacation or something, and you start getting these like, we miss you discount, come back, you know, all this stuff. And you're like, I didn't go, like I took a week off, like chill out, you know, like this is my one break. But yeah, to your point, because we know what happens behind the curtain. They trigger by an event. You haven't opened app or whatever event is in X days, therefore churn. Whereas a propensity model would say this user is not that likely to churn because we see this type of behavior frequently enough that someone takes a week off, and they're showing patterns of taking a week off. And there might be things I do differently. Like the week I come back, I might play more because I like missed the week off, or all these patterns that like we can try to draw manually in our heads that, you know, either do or do not make sense.
We set hard cutoffs because we have to conserve effort as people. That's both the data scientist and the anthropologist to be talking. Like we do that. we try to conserve our energy, and so we arbitrarily say, okay, this is something that gets my attention, this other thing doesn't. It's not a very effective way of dealing with issues. It can be an efficient way if you need that efficiency. But if you don't need that efficiency because you have a machine helping you, what you actually would want, like even if you were doing just a number of days, if instead of viewing it as count up the number of days, if it's over this line, send the message. It would be on day 0, there should be a 0% chance of sending that message because they're already there. Day 1, there should be a very small percentage that you'll send the message. And then day 2, a larger one and a larger one and a larger one and a larger one, and you keep getting larger. And as soon as they respond to a message, then you reset them again because they've come back to the app. And so what you're getting is this adaptive flow of them going through, and so some people, yes, will get it after 7 days, but some people will get it after 3 days. Now, with a propensity model, you can be even smarter than that because it's no longer just how many days. That actually can go into the propensity model if you're looking to model their churn. But you could also say, well, yes, it's been 7 days since we saw them, but they completed 3 purchases in the week before we saw them leave. Which means they're given that the model can be like that is not the history of someone who typically churns. And so we can give them a longer grace period. Like the model can incorporate that kind of information to be able to make an individual decision. Weighing all that stuff for a human is just like, I don't know how to do that. And most tools for messaging require you to weigh that information because it requires you to say, well, select what attribute is going to trigger and then how many days since they did that thing, and that's what's going to do it, which is why it becomes so overwhelming and why most people don't use most of that functionality in a messaging tool. But that shouldn't be that shouldn't be drop downs. That shouldn't be something that you go in like, I'm toggling this on, I'm selecting this, I'm entering this value. Rather, it's you letting the system know that you want to prevent churn, and the system creating a propensity model that then manages your churn management instead of you managing it directly. That way you can do it a lot smarter, and you get more of the efficiency savings because you don't even have to set the rules.
Yeah, I can see your purchase example is a good idea. Originally, I was thinking of things like back to school season. You make these
Mhm.
large bulk purchases, but it's every back to school season. So it's like you shouldn't treat that person as if they're dead in 7 days because back to
Yeah.
school season is once a year. But to your point, if I come in and I make a large purchase versus I make a lot of small purchases every single day, like, yeah, your purchase size should influence
Yeah. And it
your
doesn't even have
messaging
to
on
be
churn, but
purchases.
also,
Go ahead.
yeah. Oh, I was gonna say also like but this is rule on top of rule on top of rule on top of
Mhm.
rule. I need to pay track. Now it's my purchase size plus and that's where it gets us down kind of like that's
That's
where
what I
my
was gonna
headache
say
starts.
is we found it with several apps is that managing your wish list, even deleting things from your wish list is actually increases your propensity to retain. Because
So I
it
want to
means
set
like,
all my
why,
goals to
why
delete. I
would you
want all
go
my
through and
customers to
manage your
delete
wish list
things.
if you were just going to leave? Like
Hmm.
you're going through and you are curating your experience in the app. You're investing into it the same way you're investing when you connect it to your smartwatch. And so like that's another thing you should consider. But like having a human consider all this is just not only is that like really hard for the human brain to do, but frankly, we all got better things to do. Like that, you like a computer chat GPT site is not all that great at writing a good, authentic communication to a user. Humans are still very
Hmm.
much better at doing that. Um, that's what we should be spending our time on rather than saying, okay, well, I only had time to write one generic message because I have to spend all this time creating segments and setting up triggers so I can send it out at what I hope will be the right time. Like let
Hmm.
the computer do that stuff. It's good at doing that stuff, and it doesn't get tired of doing that stuff, unlike humans. And then we can focus more on the things that we are really very good at.
Hmm. The part that speaks to me is like even on the removing something from wish list being a good indicator. Like it makes sense. It makes total sense. Deleting things from your cart or whatever
Yeah.
sounds awful, but does show that someone is likely to make a purchase. But if you extract that to like, should I send people messages to delete things from their wish? Like that doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, so what I think is cool about this is a model can understand that it's a step in the right direction and the next step that someone needs to go and how to help encourage them to get to that next step and like see that event as a positive indicator. But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that I, the human, have to like encourage people to do that event or try to figure out how to get people to delete things.
Yeah.
Like I
Although
can just
even
have the
then,
knowledge, but yeah.
a different form of propensity model is a recommender system, where it's your propensity to engage with a particular item given your previous engagements with other items. And so if something has been sitting in their wish list for a long time, you might
Mhm.
actually want to say, oh, look, you have these shoes, they've been sitting in your wish list. Maybe they're not the right shoe for you. Have you considered this similar pair?
Hmm.
Like you may actually want to get to encourage them to delete stuff from their wish list if it's not just like, hey, your wish list is messy, clean it out. It's probably not going to be useful. Although who knows?
Mhm.
I found that I'm very bad as a human predicting what kind of stuff is going to be effective to get app users to do things that we want them to do. But
Mhm.
you can say, you have this thing in here. The fact that it's been there and you haven't acted on it means there's something going on in your life. Like maybe it's not the right time. Maybe you're not sure about the purchase. Maybe you haven't reached payday yet and you're waiting for that. So you have enough money to get it, whatever. But
Mhm.
here, like, here's a different option. Is that more compelling to you? And maybe they say
Hmm.
yes, and they do that one. Maybe they say no, but it's kept them engaged with that thing, and they remember that they have this wish list item sitting around.
Mhm.
Like both ways, it can be useful. There's tons of opportunities there to have really diversified, useful engagement where it's not like, come back and see us, sale, sale, sale.
Mhm.
It's, look, we've noticed this thing. Just like it can actually be phrased as sort of like a friendly text message, like, hey, I noticed this. Just wanted to let you know that here's another option if you're interested. Like
Yeah, that's cool.
that's useful communication, and it's frankly a
I
lot more
haven't seen
authentic.
I haven't seen much like that before, which is really cool. Which is you
Yeah,
have this thing, it's been sitting here a while. Here's another different thing, if it
yeah.
pushes you over the edge. That's cool. We talked about, so I know I posted about it actually, and you responded, so I saw it. But one thing I think is interesting is how you talk about certain things. So we were at the store, and my wife saw this 8-pack of pumpkin cans of pumpkin, and is like, she was just standing looking at it. I'm like, what's, are we getting this? Are we not getting this? Or why are we just standing here? And her holdup was not about price or not about the product even necessarily, like the pumpkin itself, but she was concerned about quantity. It's too much, we're not going to eat this much. And my thought is it's canned, so it's not going to go bad. I just said that, and boom, it's in the cart. So it is funny what thing, even to your point, messaging, her propensity to buy if I gave her a lower price is negligible, because she would have been at the same level. But bringing up the fact that it's non-perishable to her greatly increased her propensity to buy.
That raises another interesting aspect of this wish list. Like, do you want to ask people to delete it? The fact that it's in there, it may be that they haven't been given a good reason to buy it. Like, just if you can think of like 5 to 10 different reasons someone would buy something, anywhere from it's super convenient to it's inexpensive to this is a very popular item, to this is a little luxury, you deserve it. Like, there's lots of different ways you could frame this, and it may be that when they have stuff in their wish list, like sending them the same message, like, hey, make sure you look at this, make sure you look at this, make sure you look at this, is going to be a big turnoff. But if you touch them a few times with different framings, maybe they're just waiting for someone to say, yeah, it's okay, you can buy this thing. Like, you don't need a reason. If you want it, you put it in the wish list, go ahead. Like, maybe that's all like, it could be that it wasn't even that you had to resolve your wife's concerns about quantity. Maybe she was just like, I want this, but I want someone to say it's okay for me to want this.
Yeah.
And when you're that like,
thought did cross my mind.
Good. Like, whoop. Like that, I do that all the time. Where I'll be like, I want this, and I'll turn to my wife, and she'll either be like, no, we don't need that, or she'll say like, hey, if you want it, let's do it. We have the money. I'm like, okay, we'll get it. Like, there's you have this opportunity for different framings when you have these kinds of stagnant behaviors, where if you're just going back and trying to push to get them to go to the end of your funnel, you're missing out on a huge opportunity, not only to authentically communicate with your users and not annoy them, but also you're probably missing out on an opportunity to get them to convert, because not everyone is going to go in that straight line. Sometimes you have to provide a slightly different path.
So we've talked about tying propensities to events, which is where our conversation started. What are people likely to do, and what do those events lead to? So people who do X are more likely to churn or not churn. We've talked about tying it to products very briefly, right? That's a recommender system. So what product do we show? Well, it depends on how likely that person is to actually be interested in that product. And now I think you just touched on tying propensities into messaging. So once I have a thing that I'm looking at, or even if I don't have a thing yet, which way do I present it in a way that is interesting or appealing to that person? So all of this seems insanely overwhelming. And like, how on earth would anyone get this type of thing set up in practical terms, right? Because we talked about, you can get a freelancer and data scientist. I mean, you have to be so deep in your data for them to be able to do it. And then how do I pick even the right outputs? And then I imagine this changes over time. Someone buys the set of shoes in their wish list, and now there are no set of shoes in their wish list. So, and people's attitudes and things change when it's back to school season or this season or that season. So how would a marketer who is interested in using propensities and propensity modeling actually get started?
So this is so my default answer, which I recognize is completely self-serving, is you find a platform that has it built in. Like that's why we built AMP. The reason we decided that was something worth building is because, for instance, Google, like, I want to set up a recommender system. And what you'll get is a bunch of very technical posts about like actually how to train the recommender system and what's the difference between a content filtering and collaborative filtering, or a hybrid system and things like that. I mean, if you're not already steeped in data science, then that's just overwhelming and unhelpful. Or else you're going to find consultancy groups. We're like, oh yeah, we'll come in and we'll set up a recommender system for you. And there's a reason the ecosystem looks like that. And that's because if you're dealing with any of this decision automation of, you not only have to ingest the data, crunch it, figure out what the good solution is, but then you need to feed that forward into your decisions, and then have the outcome, monitor the outcomes of those decisions, and then put them back into what you had before. I mean, that is, some people call it a recommender system. Some people call it a multi-arm bandit if they're more technically inclined to use that jargon. But in either case, what you're dealing with is a form of reinforcement learning, where you try something, you see if it's rewarding to your system, and then that reinforces the decisions that you made before. And the hardest part of reinforcement learning is infrastructure. It's all the pipelining that has to move everything and coordinate it, take care of all the governance, because you're going to have multiple teams trying to do all these things at once. And how do you keep them colliding with each other? Like, that is whenever we've talked to a team where they're like, oh yeah, we really like this idea of what you're doing, we talk to our data scientists and we're gonna build it. And we go, okay, great, try. And it's really funny. Like, we've had several customers that we were talking to, or who we hoped would become customers, who were talking to, that said, yeah, we're going to do that. About 6 months ago, they said that, and several of them have popped back up again. They're like, this is a lot harder than we thought it was going to be, and we're like, yeah, it is. That's why we built it. So I mean, on the one hand, yes, I don't want to make it sound like it's not hard. It's hard. The good, the silver lining, or maybe it's all silver lining, is that there's systems people are increasingly recognizing that it's a hard thing that people nevertheless want. They'll use it, but they aren't going to use it if they have to build the whole thing from scratch. That's just like that. You shouldn't have to build a tech company in order to get your marketing department to work. And so where there are increasingly companies like AMP that have taken care of that. We've shouldered the infrastructure and the algorithm development and everything like that, so you can then plug into it, and you don't even have to abandon your other platforms to do it. If you use Braze or MoEngage or CleverTap or whatever, you can just sit on top of that. Like, you don't have to get rid of that. It's because there's the messaging architecture of, I'm actually going to get this message onto one of my users' phones. But then there's the decision architecture, the actual monitoring the outcomes, ingesting all that data, figuring out what to do with it. Those two things are complementary. You can sit the decision architecture on top of any kind of messaging architecture you want. And it's like I don't know, it's like the Iron Man suit. Like, you've got the basic thing there, and the other thing just enhances the capabilities. Like there's that I would say is where I would tell people to start. And I know that it's easy for me to say that because I've invested a lot into building something that does that. But it's the doing it yourself is committing to building a mini tech company within your org. It's big. But you don't have to do that. Like, there are better options out there, and by understanding what propensity modeling can do, and understanding that you do need that pipelining, like going in as an informed buyer, you can then go through and evaluate what these different companies are doing that claim to have like AI-driven messaging, stuff like that. And you know what to look for. Like, you know what the pieces are. You just don't want to put them together yourself. You want someone who can provide that tooling for you. The same way you don't want to actually plug in every user's phone number into your phone to send them a text message. There are companies that provide the infrastructure to that scale. You need to find a tool set that allows you to make those decisions at scale.
So one red flag to your point is if a company that claims to do AI-driven messaging does not take all of your events or all of your, if they're asking for minimal data input, that should be a
many
warning
red
sign.
flags. Yes, if they say we are going to AIify your messaging, and you're like, what
First
events
thing
do
you
you?
should
And they're
look
like, oh, you don't. You just write the messages. It's like, what, you're not giving the AI anything to learn. Another red flag is when they say, oh yeah, so here we'll like make your learning, your messaging adaptive and optimized. So here's how you make campaigns and all of your triggers and things like that. Because what that means is that they've structured their entire data set using the software 1.0 mindset of individual, like you have a start and a stop to this thing. Like if you're the way this pipelining works is it feeds back in on itself, which means you shouldn't have stop dates. You start a message, and if you sent a message today and it worked really well, there's no reason you shouldn't send that message to a user who onboards next week. Like that they should be eligible to receive that. Whereas the whole campaign and trigger mindset is it's saying we're going to assume that you tell the system when everything is supposed to be sent, and we're only going to send it at those times, in which case you're no longer making use of what AI has to offer.
That's good. So let me do this. Maybe a little self-serving, but I think it's helpful to people. If people wanted to get a list of events and propensities. So the very first thing we started this whole conversation with, I want to know if a user does X event or Y event, are they more likely to be retained or more likely to churn or more likely to purchase or not purchase? How with AMP, how could they get that list?
Oh, that's just we make integration easy. We don't require an SDK. So it's just your engineers are it can be as simple as just dropping your events into a bucket every day, and we pick it up. So that it's very light touch. And once we have a sufficient history of those dropped events, usually when a company onboards with us, they'll drop like about 3 months of historical data in. Just so we can start running. If all you can do is drop in one day, and then we'll just accumulate it over time, but you can easily drop in 3 or more months. Once we have enough data, which is usually about 3 months to do a full churn model, because you have to wait to see if someone churns. That is just out of the box. Like that there's no extra effort required. Once we have that event data, the churn model is kind of just like a byproduct of our system running. So it's automatically available.
Okay. So I could get all the propensities for all of my events for churn, purchase, whatever, just by doing the data integration, essentially. Yeah. Would I also be able to get like product recommendation data, or do you have to run and send messages and things to get that?
No, product recommendations work better if we send messages, because then you have that information about what people have reacted to. Also, you make sure you don't send recommendations for things they've recently heard about. But that doesn't require that information. You can actually, our recommender system operates as a sort of a graph. So you have nodes in the graph where like a person purchases something, and then what did they purchase next? And what did they purchase after that? I mean, it's taking all that information across users. So when a user does view an item or purchase an item, we can say, what were the next steps after those that other users tended to take? And we'll feed that in. That just requires not only the event stream, but also an additional integration of an app CMS data. The events tell us they purchased something, but the CMS allows us to actually see what they purchased. And usually those two things are kept in separate places. But again, that's not an onerous integration. It's just dropping the data on a regular basis, and we manage that on our side, so you don't have to.
Okay, so that covers two of the buckets, and then obviously if you want to know the right message for the right person, I know it's cliche because everyone says it, but if you want to know the messaging with the highest propensity to convert, a specific user, that's when you also integrate your messaging platform. And then we've done all three of the things that we talked about today.
Yeah, by doing the messaging platform, you basically move from a behavioral segmentation and propensity to a psychographic one, where you can now get at, it doesn't just say, oh, these people like shoes. It's they are likely to respond by going into your funnel if you talk to them about shoes. So it's propensity to react, not just propensity to like. The recommender system can tell you propensity to like. That's just like, oh yeah, they tend to look at a lot of shoes. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to say, okay, but no matter how much they do or don't like shoes, how likely are they to actually do something if I take the action to put it in front of them, or if I frame it in this way rather than another way? That's what you get from integrating your messaging. You can get to a lot of the messaging is what gets you to a lot of the whys. The other things get you to the whats.
That makes sense. This is cool. I think, when I look at historically triggering on events, it's just what's typically done, right? You made a purchase, so therefore I sent you a thank you. You clicked on something, therefore I send you this. It's very formulaic. I see propensity as a good first step to even improve that. I mean, before we get into full AI automation of everything, it's like, I see it as, we talked about, for example, if you're 20% likely to make a purchase, I shouldn't send you a discount because you're 20% likely. You're probably not going to buy anything. So sending a discount's silly, but sending you like top products this year, here's the best products of 2023 might actually get you to find something that you might be more interested in buying. So to me, propensities give us this extra layer that allows us to market better. I think some of the things you're talking about are very cool because they make actually doing it much more approachable than what you find online, which again is all consultants and build the model yourself.
Yeah. No, I mean, just the propensity model, the predictions themselves allows you, like you said before, like the quadrant kind of approach. You can conserve your energy and your attention and say, I'm just going to focus on where I'm likely to have the most impact. That requires no pipelining. That you can do that just with the scores. Anything else is what's going to ultimately save your attention enough that you can start devoting that attention to things that a computer can't do.
No, that's very good. Did you have any last thoughts?
I don't think so. We covered a lot of ground.
All right, well, perfect. We did. Thank you so much. So thanks for joining me. Thank you to everybody who's listening along. If you want more info, I'll include our information wherever I end up putting this. But feel free to reach out. I think propensity modeling is going to quickly pop up more and more places because it has huge potential and a lot of great potential for increasing conversion, saving efficiency, and all that stuff. So thanks you again for joining me, Schaun. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.